1971, a boy was born in Texas and placed almost immediately into a sealed chamber. It was claimed that his immune system did not work, so he needed to be kept in complete isolation from the outside environment and all other people, including his mother. He became known as the Bubble Boy, and for a decade the story was broadcast across news networks around the world. While now largely forgotten, the impact it had in cementing the ideas of germ theory and contagion cannot be underestimated. In this video, we'll look into the scientific considerations related to the Bubble Boy's condition and the claim that his death was due to a hidden virus. This is an important chapter, revealing how the public has been deceived into fearing alleged contagious germs to increase the buy-in rates to events such as COVID-19. I'm going to cover a lot of ground, but as always, there are plenty of references in the show notes.
We have a story tonight about a little boy in Houston, Texas, and the unfortunate life disease has brought him.
He is known only as Baby David. He cannot leave his plastic bubble. Since birth, David has never touched another human being.
David's entire 12-year life was spent inside a plastic isolated bubble to protect him from the germs that his body could not fend off. He was never physically a prisoner in the bubble. He had merely understood the dangers the outside environment posed to his system. Germ theory is science, according to the Public Broadcasting Service. Wikipedia states that David Philip Vetter was an American boy with severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID, a hereditary disease which dramatically weakens the immune system. Vetter's parents were Carol Ann and David Joseph Vetter Jr. Their first son, David Joseph III, was also born with SCID and died at 7 months old. Physicians advised the Vetters that any future male children they might conceive would have a 50% chance of inheriting the disease. At the time, the only management available for children born with SCID was isolation in a sterile environment until a successful bone marrow transplant could be performed. The Vetters, who had a daughter, decided to proceed with another pregnancy. Their third child, David Philip Vetter, was born on September 21, 1971. To uninitiated members of the public or indoctrinated health professionals, the surrounding story may appear to be backed by sound science. Tragically, it contains elements of monumental medical fraud. The first is the claim that the only management available for children born with SCID was isolation in a sterile environment. In this context, we know that isolation does not mean the virologist's woolly definition of the word, but isolation's actual definition, meaning to separate the child from all others. And that is what they did to baby David. However, quote, only management implies that this was established as a clear-cut fact and something that was supported by medical science. If this is the case, then where are the references? Wikipedia does not provide any, and neither can we find this claim to be backed up elsewhere. Instead, what exists in the literature are papers like this 2015 one, titled Isolation Protocol for Patients with Severe Combined Immunodeficiency, which states that many centres believe that protective isolation is required for treatment of SCID patients once diagnosed, and the isolation protocol varies across institutions. Well, believe is not evidence and simply reflects the prevailing establishment position. Echoing this, and without substantive evidence, a 2023 review paper, Severe Combined Immunodeficiency and its New Treatment Modalities, stated, the patient is completely isolated, like being in a bubble. This is because there are high chances of getting an infection from the surroundings through sources such as the parents, relatives, or the hospital setting itself. Several articles simply refer to the CDC's Guidelines for Preventing Opportunistic Infections among hematopoietic stem cell transplant recipients, published in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report in the year 2000. When you scroll down these, quote, guidelines, it becomes apparent that some sections are more like a big pharma sales catalogue. In summary, None of this provides evidence that someone diagnosed with SCID has improved health outcomes by isolating them in a particular way, including in a crazy bubble, as they did with David Vetter. The second point is the claim that an individual labelled with this diagnosis gets sick because they don't have an adequate immune system. Along with our colleagues such as Mike Stone and Drs. Andy Kaufman and Tom Cowan, our research over recent years has concluded that there is no evidence for such a thing. While there are white blood cells and various proteins related to inflammation and healing, the idea that this, quote, defends us from microbes is not backed by experimental evidence. Microbes do not have the capacity to attack healthy tissue. They only begin breaking down tissue after it has become devitalized. The causes of this include trauma, insufficient circulation, malnutrition, hypoxia, and poisoning. The solution is to reverse the underlying cause and restore the terrain, not engage in a phony war against the microbes who are doing nature's intended work. For more information on the fallacies of the artificial construct known as the immune system, you can watch some of my other presentations, including Is Immunity Real? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that patients diagnosed with SCID are not unwell and in a potentially fatal situation, but blaming germs is nonsense. A 2011 Pediatric Medical Journal article stated that affected infants generally appear well at birth, but within the first few months of life demonstrate failure to clear infections and present with persistent respiratory tract or gastrointestinal infections, failure to thrive, and sometimes apparent food intolerance. Here they are looking at things back to front. The underlying problem is failure to thrive and poor general health, which then leads to the, quote, failure to clear infections. Keep in mind that infection derives from the Latin inficere and originally meant to spoil or to stain, not be attacked by microbes. Children with SCID have terrain problems, which is why the microbes can then proliferate. The European Journal of Pediatrics article goes on to state that persistent viral diarrhea with failure to thrive is an important sign. Again, this is looking at things the wrong way. As we have covered in the greatest of detail over recent years, there is no evidence that viruses exist. Additionally, infant diarrhea is not the cause, but the response to illness. It is a condition that has been perversely capitalized on by the drug industry, as I covered in Pharmaceutical Fraud and the Discovery of Rotavirus, our joint production with the Health Freedom Defence Fund. The journal article then states, although patients with SCID are often initially well and growing normally, they fall away from the growth centile after a few months when infection occurs because of intestinal villus atrophy, leading to malabsorption, which in severe cases results in malnutrition. Now we get to the crux of the issue. The child has a malfunctioning gut and suffers from malabsorption. Throwing in the word infection is disingenuous because it implies that microbes are attacking the individual to bring about the problem. In our book, Virus Mania, we wrote that flaws in Louis Pasteur's germ theories were shown long ago in the first half of the 20th century by experiments in which animals were kept completely germ-free. Their birth even took place by caesarean section. After that, they were locked in microbe-free cages and given sterile food. After a few days, all the animals were dead. In rats reared germ-free, the appendix was abnormally enlarged, filled with mucus, which would normally have been broken down by microbes. This made it apparent that, quote, contamination by exogenous bacteria is absolutely essential to their lives. The individuals with so-called SCID are not being attacked by microbes in the gut. In fact, they are what is keeping them alive. The only thing we can conclude is that there is an underlying problem with their gut, which can lead to proliferation of certain microbes due to the compromised tissue. Before we go even further, let's examine how the supposedly specific disease known as SCID is diagnosed. The medical literature states that numerous case series demonstrate 100% sensitivity for identifying typical severe combined immunodeficiency, defined as those infants with a T cell count lower than 300 cells per microliter. Specificity is also high, identified as 99.98% in a cohort of infants undergoing newborn screening for severe combined immunodeficiency. This all sounds impressive until you consider how rare the condition is, being something like 1 in 50,000 down to 1 in 100,000 newborns. This means that they cite a positive predictive value ranging from 0.8% to 11.2%. Even on their own terms, there will be a false diagnosis in up to 99 out of 100 applications of the test. One of the other tests used to diagnose SCID is a PCR technique to estimate a particular DNA sequence in T cells. The medical establishment holds that SCID is caused by various genetic disorders that result in a compromised immune system. However, this has been done by claiming that various defective proteins and enzymes are part of said immune system, so it would only be relevant within the model if there was such a thing. Hence, the various variants that have been placed under the SCID umbrella are falsely derived, as there is no evidence for the I or immuno in SCID. The claim that these are all genetic conditions is another concern, because it implies that nature made a mistake, and thus there are no reversible causes when the child is either in utero or following birth. The central dogma of molecular biology has misled people into believing that there is a one-way flow of information in biological systems. Again, in Chapter 1 of Virus Mania, we pointed out the experiments last century by Barbara McClintock, who demonstrated that DNA sequences themselves can be changed by exposing cell lines to various changes in their environment. However, this possibility is inconvenient for the medical industry, and its experts have concluded that a bone marrow transplant is the only way to cure the condition. As we will soon see, this has been done to create a paradigm where most deaths can then be blamed on the condition rather than any apparently heroic medical interventions. If there are defective proteins, I do not claim to know what ultimately causes them or if they relate to one another in the umbrella condition known as SCID, but we can say it should be approached in a case-by-case basis. No stone should be left unturned in finding reversible causes which compromise the terrain in the first place. The promotion of the genetic paradigm has also led to the push for expanded newborn screening programs.
Our driving focus is newborn screening, to let the world know that this is a condition that's still taking our babies' lives every day.
In 2008, advocates like Heather Smith helped push Wisconsin to begin screening all newborns for severe combined immune deficiency. In fits and starts, other states followed suit, leading to the realization that this genetic defect was more common than generally thought.
Notice how they stated that, quote, this genetic defect was more common than generally thought. Like any alleged screening program invented by the medical system, if you test, you will find. Despite the pressure applied to parents, the heel prick blood test or Guthrie card is completely unnecessary for almost every newborn baby. At this point, we will return to Wikipedia's David Vetter entry and the section regarding his parents. It states, their first son, David Joseph III, was also born with SCID and died at 7 months old. Understandably, most readers would conclude that he died of SCID, but that is not what actually happened. We find out on the PBS American Experience website that Catherine's bone marrow appeared to be an acceptable match to her brother's, and a transfusion was made, but David Joseph died before it could take. He was 7 months old. Before it could take is a euphemism for the procedure killing him. Bone marrow transplants are extremely risky procedures that involve toxic chemicals such as cyclophosphamide and total body irradiation. They come with a high fatality rate, but people are led to believe it is the condition rather than the treatment that kills someone, as portrayed with David Vetter's older brother. Similarly, David Vetter's death has been framed as a, quote, complication from SCID, but in reality, he was also killed by a bone marrow transplant. Not only that, but the medical and virology establishments added another spurious twist to the story.
The little Houston boy provided a vital missing link between a common viral infection and the development of cancer.
The final tragedy of David's life was that the transplant had initially worked. But within the transplanted marrow, a dormant Epstein-Barr virus lay hidden. It awoke when transferred into David's immune-compromised body, triggering a deadly cancer. This was the first time such a phenomenon had been observed.
In other words, he was doing okay and had made it to 12 years of age when they performed a medical procedure that caused cancer and his rapid death. The preposterous notion that Epstein-Barr virus has been shown to exist or cause cancer has been debunked in my video Glandular Fever and the Fable of EBV. It was claimed that David's parents and medical team were trying to provide him with, quote, as normal a life as possible, including a formal education and a television and playroom inside the sterile chamber. It is hard to imagine how any sense of a normal life was possible when his Wikipedia entry states that, after he was placed in the sterile chamber, Vita was touched only through special plastic gloves attached to the walls of the chamber, which was kept inflated by air compressors that were so loud that communication with David was difficult. Despite a protocol where everything going into his bubble was first placed in a chamber filled with ethylene oxide gas for 4 hours at 60 degrees Celsius or 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the notion that everything inside David's chamber was sterile is complete fantasy. If this was the case, then he would have died within days, as per the aforementioned animal experiments we discussed in Virus Mania. David would have had microbes all over his body, as well as inside his gut, and there is no possible way to sterilize a human without killing them. Buying into germ theory has been one of mankind's greatest follies, and was warned against long ago. In 1900, Dr. Henry Rogers wrote in the New England Medical Monthly that the infinitesimal germ cannot be separated from its surroundings and so isolated and experimented with as to demonstrably show that a certain describable form of germ is capable of producing a special form of disease. The power to discriminate between germs of such infinite smallness and to pronounce one to be pathogenic or disease-producing and another simple and harmless does not exist in man. We know that nothing has changed since that time, and there exists no scientific evidence that microbes in themselves can be called pathogens.
Today, David has been removed from his bubble for the first time in his life. But the reason for his freedom is not good news.
David, the 12-year-old boy who lived in a plastic bubble until 2 weeks ago, is listed in critical condition tonight.
The saddest part of the saga for me was the end of David's life, following the fatal medical procedure, when it was stated, those last days were the first time his parents ever held him, and the first time he saw them without a sheet of plastic between them. Did David have an underlying problem that required special attention? Quite possibly. Was there any sense keeping him inside a bubble for almost his entire 12 years of life? Definitely not. However, the Bubble Boy story has been used to fuel the public's morbid fascination with the concept of germs and contagion. In the same decade that David died, populations were then propagandized by the invention of HIV. It has been one fear campaign after another, indoctrinated into them for over a century, as we have covered in both Virus Mania and the final pandemic. Events such as COVID-19 are only possible due to the widespread and erroneous belief in the existence of pathogens. Anyone pushing such pseudoscience needs to examine their potential role in propagating endless interventions and encroachment by the biosecurity surveillance state. Those of us that are awake to the fraud will keep shining light on this evil. The creation of David in his bubble seems clear evidence that the medical world, and perhaps Western society at large, has drifted into a kind of technocratic imperialism. If it appears that the technocrats have become a law unto themselves, it is only because the community as a whole, in its passivity, invites the authority of technical experts to be laid upon them. The Reverend Raymond J. Lawrence, 1985. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com.